I've had the privilege to spend time and work with some of the world's most innovative builders and founders, friends like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Charles Koch, Alex Karp. I've learned that these men all share one thing in common. It's something that's helped all of them build some of the most important companies, the biggest companies that run our civilization. It's also helped me to found and build multiple multi-billion-dollar companies. What is it that sets these men apart? How they seem to bend the world to their will? And how do they keep winning time and time again? Let's go over a common thread in their life and how we can apply it to our lives. If you want to understand where the world's going to be in 10 years, in 20 years, and you want what you're building to be influential in the world, you have to really understand the nature of the world itself. If you want to understand how to get the most out of the people around you, how to help them fully self-actualize, you should really understand the philosophy of what self-actualizing is and what their needs are and how you inspire them to get there. And if you want your company to work with other companies and create value and grow, you need to understand what value even is. What is mutual benefit? How do markets work? How can you take the ways that markets work and our civilization works and apply those to the frameworks of your company? And there's no one better at doing that than Charles Koch.
You're like one of the richest people in the world.
Charles Koch grew his family business, Koch Industries, into one of the largest privately held companies in America.
The biggest problem in the world, and it always has been, this, what Nietzsche called and Viktor Frankl called the will to power. That is, this top-down approach, because I'm smarter than you or I want power over you, to approach it that way, a command and control system. What the principles of human progress teach, the principles in the Declaration of Independence teach is, no, you don't want power over people, you want to empower people.
Charles Koch's turning 90 soon. The business he built is the largest private business in America and in the world. And he could be said to be the greatest applied philosopher of the last century. He wrote books on this that should be more widely read. His Market-Based Management, for example, is a really important book. He calls himself the chief philosophy officer of his company. And there's a lot for all of us to learn from Charles Koch.
I'm CEO, but I'm really in the philosophy department, constantly looking for gaps between what we could be doing if we were following the principles and what we are doing. The secret in an organization is to get all of your employees to do that, to fully engage them, to get them all to start self-actualizing.
The common thread I've noticed about these men is that they're deeply curious about the world. They're very interested in philosophy. Peter Thiel did philosophy undergrad. Elon Musk studied physics and philosophy. Alex Karp, my co-founder at Palantir, has a PhD in philosophy from the top philosopher in Europe at the time, Habermas. But these men are all deeply interested in how the world works.
He co-founded PayPal and Palantir.
Was the first outside investor in Facebook, which we know changed the world.
The team around him went on to create groundbreaking startups. You've heard of them all, like YouTube, Yelp, Kiva, LinkedIn, and Tesla.
He's also the author of the #1 New York Times bestselling book, 0 to 1, Notes on Startups, or How to Build the Future.
I first met Peter Thiel at Stanford. We sparred over a variety of intellectual debates in chess, both very interested in economics and history, but really at a core of how the world works. Learned a huge amount from Peter about how he thinks of things philosophically. One of the most influential thinkers in Peter's life was René Girard. Girard addresses a lot of different topics. He's probably the most important Christian philosopher of the 20th century. Girard discusses how imitation is inescapable. You kind of really can understand a lot about what you want in the world, what other people want, how desire works through his mimetic theories. Girard's ideas help us understand how to think about competition, how we end up competing for the same things, and how to avoid some of these flaws built into human nature in order to aim higher, in order to do new things and escape kind of the bounds of our normal desire or normal ways in which human nature is filtered.
So the standard account of conflict is that it arises when people fight about differences, whereas in mimetic theory, conflict arises when people fight about the same thing. And certainly my experience over the last 10, 12 years is that that's almost always the case, that the really great conflicts were over people wanting the same thing, the same position, the same promotion, the same set of responsibilities. And so one of the challenges as a CEO in a lot of these companies, I think, is to try to apply mimetic theory and preemptively avoid conflict by making sure that roles are reasonably well differentiated. In most of these companies, whether they succeed or fail, is often driven by internal dynamics, not by external ones.
Peter sees the world very differently and he acts on it. And so not everything Peter does is a crazy success. Sometimes things that are very different and crazy actually are just end up being crazy. But sometimes they end up being the first investment in Facebook or supporting us to build Palantir and helping us do so when no one else would. Or so many other things that Peter's gotten right, whether it's with Airbnb early, SpaceX before Elon had his success there right at the very beginning. Peter's willing to think about things from first principles as Elon is as well, and to approach things from a totally different angle. And that's led to a lot of success.
There's a tremendous value in trying to do things that are new or that are different. Thinking about how disturbingly herd-like people become in so many different contexts is something that mimetic theory forces you. It forces you to think about that, which is this sort of knowledge that's generally suppressed and hidden. As an investor entrepreneur, I've always tried to be contrarian, to go against the crowd, to identify opportunities that in places where people were not looking. And I think that those are the places one finds the greatest opportunities, whether it's in starting companies or in making investments.
Few scientists, entrepreneurs, or industrialists of the last century could stake a claim to a career as boldly ambitious as the one Elon Musk is fashioning now.
He's the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and a co-founder of several other companies.
And is currently working on perfecting reusable rockets, space travel, connecting the human brain directly to computers, connecting cities with electromagnetic bullet trains, the Starlink satellite system that's so important to the war in Ukraine.
In college, Elon studied philosophy and physics. He definitely approaches the world from first principles. His views on things like Mars and government are not just kind of like randomly out of nowhere. It's clear he thinks very deeply about things. He goes back to the root of how the world works and analyzes it and doesn't accept conventional wisdom. Very similar in some ways to Peter Thiel and how I approach things, which is that just because something is the way it is, just because it's broken, doesn't mean it always needs to be broken.
When I was a teenager, I had like an existential crisis to try to figure out what's the meaning of life. Then I started reading philosophers, careful of like reading German philosophers as a teenager. As a kid, you're like, whoa. And then I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and basically what Douglas Adams was saying is that we don't really know what the right questions are to ask. The universe is the answer, but what are the questions?
I've been really impressed listening to him philosophize. I think he was at Milken earlier talking about education. I think it's great how he's reevaluating these things from first principles, whether it's education, whether it's warfare, whether it's with Doge, and it leads to a lot of success.
I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done. It's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. You kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy. Somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb. So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, what if we bought that on the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? You just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes.
Co-founded by Peter Thiel back in 2003.
A company called Palantir.
Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale.
Building Palantir, we persuaded Peter to hire a very unconventional CEO. Alex Karp had been his friend at law school and was just finishing studying philosophy in Germany. Turns out a lot of philosophers in Europe are very popular with elite crowds, and so Alex got into these crowds and was advising them and figuring out how their institutions worked.
And then you went to Frankfurt?
Then I went to Frankfurt
for
and got
PhD in neoclassical
social philosophy, which is a fancy way of saying a quick path to being unemployed. Certainly to be the highest educated, least earning person on the planet.
And why did you do that?
Well, the same reason I got involved in founding Palantir. I was really passionate about the issues. I largely wasn't putting money ahead of what I thought was important. Some of the ideas I dealt with were actually quite important. What does it mean to know something? What does it mean to communicate it? What is the foundation of Western society? Can we participate as citizens, and how? I was very passionate about those ideas, just like I'm passionate about my business, Palantir.
When we started working with Palantir and trying to break into large institutions to help fix them, it turned out that the people and the frameworks for these institutions were extremely complicated. I had no idea as a 21-year-old how I was coming across, how to get into them, how to change them. You got to really deeply understand people, how you're perceived, how institutions and power and perception actually work in order to get through the door. This is something that Alex Karp had mastered.
Our times getting Palantir off the ground were just crazy magical, dangerous, scary. We almost went out of business a lot of times. And in fact, except for the fact that we were so maniacally focused on getting this thing to work, it would never have worked because no one wanted to invest in us. All the top VCs were like, it's a crazy idea to be interested in data, working with large institutions.
From the early days of Palantir, we were really inspired to approach things with a philosophical angle. Some of my background in that area, I was obsessed with David Hume. I was obsessed with a lot of the science of knowledge and how knowledge works, and approaching things with ontologies, with new schemas, which is different ways of organizing concepts, different ways of understanding how the human mind works and approach data, and how to get the human mind to access terabytes and petabytes of information naturally for analysts. These were all philosophical frameworks we had to apply to build Palantir. So that company could be said to really come from a very deep philosophical background.
And it all involves both sides of this equation, finding people who are up to essentially bad things, both in the anti-terror area, in cyber, in financial malfeasance, mortgage fraud, but also making sure the data is tagged in a way that allows agencies to collaborate with one another, which is one of the big findings in the 9/11 Commission. Why weren't people able to collaborate? People tend to focus on the policy issues, but there are also massive technical issues that had to be solved, and solved in a way where you can just install it. We do that. And the second piece is, how do you do it so that when the government is looking at you or me, it's clear that they're looking at you and me for a reason. If they bring a case against us, what is the case? Where did the evidence come from? Did it come from sources they were allowed to see? Did they migrate from the source of one piece of evidence into another source? These are the kind of questions that Americans care a lot about.
Today, Palantir is one of the largest companies in the world. It helped prevent hundreds of terror attacks, eliminate a lot of terrorists, help solve very hard, important problems to run a lot of the biggest companies in the world. And the world would look very differently today if Palantir didn't exist, if it hadn't blocked some of these attacks, if it hadn't saved the government already tens of billions of dollars. And so it was really cool to be able to apply this and to learn from Alex and Peter in building this together.